She took the first 3 logs like a magician takes a coin, so cleanly I thought I imagined it. My stack was tight, corded oak, each split face stacked east-west so the grain lines made a quiet sort of topography along the fence. I'd spent October and my lower back building that wall. November, the pile started to shrink. Not from my stove either. I burned neat, 2 in the morning, 2 at night, a bucket of kindling like pencils in a jar. But the math didn't work. I'd run my hand along the top row and feel a hollow where there was height before, a missing chunk like a bite out of a sandwich. There's a particular humiliation to realizing someone is lifting the most basic thing you've earned with your hands. You split wood with a maul. You earn winter one swing at a time. And she kept lifting it like I'd stacked it just for her. I didn't assume a she at first. I assumed raccoons, then teenagers, then the trash service crew taking a favor for a garage fire pit. I zip-tied the gate. I wrote the date with a Sharpie on the end grain of 3 logs, tiny initials like a quiet signature. I pushed the security light sensitivity from medium to hair trigger and aimed it right at the gate. The light popped on at cats, moths, and the wind, and every time my heart jumped like it used to when a text buzzed after midnight. The next morning, 4 more logs gone. My initials were absent from the heap like they'd never existed. I can take a hint when a hint comes with sawdust under it. I set up the old trail cam I used to pretend I'd get into birding with. Fresh batteries, fresh SD card, sensor pointed right along the fence where the firewood leaned like a sleeping man. I didn't sleep much that night. The cold came in sharp, first honest hard frost of the season, the kind that makes old wood ring a little when it settles. I listened to the house make the noises it makes at 2 a.m. and let the worry run its loops. It wasn't about the money. Wood isn't cheap, but it isn't a mortgage either. It was about the taking, about the audacity of fingers that don't belong to you closing around what does. There's something old in me, maybe in most of us, that flares at that kind of trespass. It's not just modern ownership, it's ancient. The campfire ring and the meat you hunted and the boundary you dragged with your own effort out of wildness. I could hear my grandfather saying, half joking, there's 2 kinds of people, folks who ask and folks who just reach. He was saying it while handing you a sandwich because he was that kind of man, generous and suspicious at once. At 5:36 a.m., the motion sensor tripped. My phone buzzed with the camera app's alert. I was already halfway to the back door when the thumbnail popped up. Cold, gray, recognizable. A woman, hood up, scarf pulled to the bridge of her nose, gloves, boots, moving with the economy of someone who's done this before. Not a teenager, not a raccoon, not even a pair of them. Just her. Quick as a story you wait too long to tell. She didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the gate, slid it back into place so the latch kissed the post, plucked 3 logs like apples, set them in a milk crate, and walked. She parked around the corner, not on my street, and was gone in 90 seconds. My first thought wasn't her name. My first thought was the way she handled the wood. Not roughly, not like a thief in a hurry, more like someone trying to not wake a baby. I watched the clip again. I watched it until my coffee went cold, then I put on a coat and walked the long block in the direction she'd come from. You learn your neighborhood in new ways when you decide to look like a detective. You notice which driveways have oil stains and which have feathers because someone throws birdseed, and which have salt because someone slipped last year and still remembers. There's a way people leave their mornings in their yards. At the end of the block, I saw the milk crate sitting neat in the corner of a small porch, like it belonged. A second milk crate sat beside it, empty, like punctuation. The front door was the color of brick dust. The mat said home in a font that tried hard. The front window had a gap in the blinds just big enough to be human. And there, propped haphazardly against the siding, like a shortcut, were my initials staring back at me from the end grain of a log that hadn't made it inside yet. Elaine lived there. Not the HOA Elaine, a different Elaine. The one with the gray sedan and a husky that howled when the mail carrier walked by. The one who wore a long black coat like she was prepared for bad weather of any kind. We'd spoken 5 times. Once about a block party flyer, once about a package of mine that ended up on her stoop, twice when she waved a little too eagerly for it to be for me and not for a memory, and once when her dog dug under my fence and I discovered I liked the dog more than I should admit. She wasn't the neighbor you suspect at first. She was too tidy. She was the neighbor who notices. That's what made me angry in a specific way. She'd noticed my wood, she'd noticed my camera, she'd been careful anyway. I'm not a first-thing confrontation guy. I'm a make-a-list guy. So I walked back, printed 3 stills from the footage, wrote the time and date, and tucked them in a folder, because that's what TV teaches you to do about proof. I told myself I'd knock at noon, when the day I'd warmed a hair, when the anger had ironed itself a little. I split 6 logs by the fence to get my hands tired enough to soften my voice. By noon, I was less interested in catching and more interested in understanding. But I was still deeply interested in catching. I took the folder, walked back, and knocked. The husky barked like a siren. "Coming!" a voice called, muffled by a house fuller than mine. The door cracked. A face peeked through. The same scarf pushed down, cheeks flushed, hair tied into a knot that had given up on neatness. "Oh," she said when she saw me. Not "oh hello," not "oh neighbor." Oh, as in recognition that the world had finally called the bet she'd been placing every morning at 5:30. "Hey, Elaine," I said, as evenly as a person with a folder of printed evidence could say it. "Got a minute?" She closed the door the 3 inches she had opened it, unlatched, and opened a foot. The husky snuffled my jeans and debated loyalty. The house smelled like cinnamon and something else, metallic, hot, the smell of a space heater's dust burning off. "Is this about—" She gestured towards my shoulder, as if the woodpile was a backpack I wore. "It is," I said. I held out the folder. "I think you have something that belongs to me." Her eyes flicked from the folder to my face and back to the gap in her blinds, as if a camera could save her from the one I'd brought with me. "Can we talk inside?" And that little turn was the first shock, not the big one. Thieves don't usually invite you in. People with stories do. I hesitated the 2 seconds you hesitate when you read a true crime headline too closely, then I stepped in out of the cold and into a house that would explain more than a grainy thumbnail ever could.
Her living room was colder than my porch, the kind of cold that steals sound from a room and makes the air feel thin. Plastic was taped over the windows, the clear kind you shrink with a hairdryer that never quite seals at the edges. A small ceramic heater hummed on the floor near a couch stocked with blankets. The thermostat on the wall said 57. The husky potted ahead of me and flopped against a beanbag where a pair of little socks stuck out, toes peeking like punctuation marks. She caught my glance and tugged the blanket higher. "He's up before school when the heat kicks," she said. Only it doesn't. She didn't start with excuses. She started with a drawer. A tidy stock of envelopes sat inside. Utility notices, maintenance requests, a red tagged warning with the furnace company's logo stamped in triplicate. "They shut it down," she said, topping the red tag. "Carbon monoxide risk. Condemned until repair." She showed me the dates, 2 weeks before the first log went missing. "Landlord says parts are backordered. Sent space heaters and said don't use the oven. It's fine in the day, it's the mornings." The space heater clicked off. The room remembered cold like a habit. "I burned through everything I had from last winter by Thanksgiving," she said. I thought wrong." The fireplace was real brick, not decorative. A wire screen leaned against the hearth, a grate inside holding a few exhausted embers. On the hearthstone sat a grocery sack of broken pallet pieces, the desperate kindling people feed to fire when wood is scarce. "You could have knocked," I said, gentler than I was an hour earlier. She nodded once, eyes on the floor. "I almost did," she said. "The first morning I was halfway to your door, but I pictured you asking and me explaining, and then I pictured the HOA finding me for a cord of wood on the porch, and then I pictured CPS if I said the heat was out, and I made a decision with my fear." There's a strange thing that happens when anger runs into the context it asked for. It doesn't vanish, it shifts shape. I was still angry at the taking. I was angrier at a world where taking felt safer to her than asking. "Ask me now," I said. She laughed once, not the good kind. "Can I have wood so my kid doesn't see his breath?" she said. "Can you also make the parts show up and the landlord return my calls?" It wasn't sarcasm. It was a tired inventory of the obvious. "I'll get you heat today," I said. "After that, we'll make phones ring." She pulled a manila folder from under the coffee table and spread it beside my evidence, like 2 sides of a truth. There were text threads with a property manager named Craig, who responded with thumbs up emojis and "working on it." There were rent receipts. She hadn't missed one. There was an email to the HOA asking for permission to store a half-cord behind her fence, quote, temporarily because of a furnace repair, and a reply from the president reminding her that visible firewood invites pests and, quote, any storage must be, quote, pre-approved and screened with a PDF of the rules attached. So I hid wood in a crate and brought it inside before dawn, which is stupider than a fine. I could feel my brain trying to file it into categories I knew: negligent landlord, rigid HOA, pride, fear, winter. None of those words felt big enough in that room. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it in the way that isn't apology, but solidarity. You still can't take without asking, I added, because truth has to ride in the same car as empathy or it goes off the road. I know, she said. I told myself I'd put it back, like borrowing a cup of sugar if sugar weighed 8 pounds. Practicality is my religion when life gets fuzzy. Okay, I said, standing. Step 1 is heat that isn't guesswork. I'll bring over enough wood to get you through a week, but not pallets. That chimney needs a sweep before you burn junk. I've got a code detector still in a box. You keep the doors cracked and not flue wide open. Step 2, we call your landlord and the company on the red tag from my phone on speaker so they hear there's a witness. Step 3, we email the HOA and copy the board not to ask for permission to exist, but to notify them of a safety issue they need to stop pretending is a deco problem. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, like a muscle unclenched. You don't have to, she started. I know, I said. I'm choosing to. The kid sat up under the blanket, then, hair like a storm, and blinked at me with the solemnity kids keep in the morning. The husky thumped his tail once and pressed his head into the small pair of socks. Do you like pancakes? I asked the kid, and he nodded, because that's the right answer. First fire, then pancakes. The wheelbarrow squeaked like it hadn't been asked to be noble in a while. I loaded 15 splits in a pile of kindling, 2 bundles of fat wood, and a CO detector still of plastic. As I turned into her yard, a couple of curtains across the street did that very specific neighbor thing where they pretend to be curtains. I didn't care. I stalked the wood neatly by her back door under the eave, set the detector on the mantle, and vacuumed the hearth the way my grandfather taught me. Slow pulls, no ash clouds. I opened the flue, built a small hot fire, and watched the thermometer on the mantle climb from the wrong 50s towards a right 60-something. The sound a house makes when it starts to warm is tiny and brave. We made 3 calls while the room remembered comfort. The first to the property manager went to voicemail. The second to the number on the furnace tag found a technician who said the part was in and the install queued for early next week. Then when I asked what early meant, said Tuesday. The third to the HOA got the president's cheerful recording about community standards. I hung up. We won't leave this to voicemails, I said. We'll go to the office after breakfast. She winced. They don't like me, she said, and I could hear the years behind that sentence. They will like the law, I said, and they'll like a neighbor who isn't alone. The shock that would belong to everyone later was only a seed then. It didn't sprout until we walked into the HOA office and saw a familiar last name on a nameplate under Property Management Liaison, or until we printed minutes where executive session began the same day her maintenance request went in progress, or until we realized the person who wrote the rule about visible firewood also happened to own the company that managed half the rentals on our block. That would come. For now, I wrote Tuesday on a sticky note and taped it to her thermostat like a promise. Tuesday, or sooner.
The nameplate on the HOA desk was the kind of detail you almost miss until it detonates the whole story. Craig Harlow, Property Management Liaison. Craig, like the working on it texts on Elaine's phone. Harlow, like the HOA president whose emails came with PDFs and cheer. My mouth said hi, but my brain said, of course. The receptionist, all smiles and seasonal sweater, asked how she could help. Heat, I said, and firewood. She blinked like I'd asked for a fishing license. We don't manage individual maintenance, she said. We manage standards. And standards include not freezing your members, I said, placing Elaine's red tag notice, a copy of her furnace condemnation, her HOA email thread, and a printout of the rule about visible firewood on the counter like cards in a neat fan. The door behind the desk opened, and a man stepped out with a clipboard and the last name from the sign. He had the look of someone who's been in a meeting since 2009. I'm Craig, he said, extending a hand as if that gesture could preempt accountability. I didn't take it. You manage units in this HOA, I said, tapping the liaison title, and you sit in meetings where rules are written that make it harder to manage habitability. He glanced at the papers, then at Elaine. Recognition flickered. Embarrassment did not. We take safety seriously, he said. Our vendor has the part. Your vendor's calendar is not a blanket, I said. State code requires heat capable of maintaining 68 degrees between October and May. The furnace is red tagged. She's been heating with pallet scraps and fear. He started into a paragraph about supply chain and unprecedented demand. I cut him off with a paragraph about law. Implied warranty of habitability, local housing standards, notice to cure, code enforcement's authority to issue emergency orders. I wasn't threatening, I was reciting. The receptionist stopped typing. People within earshot did that office thing where they pretend to read while listening harder. We're not here for a fight, I said, lowering my voice. We're here for a date today for an install and a letter from the HOA acknowledging that temporary firewood storage behind a screen fence during an emergency does not violate any rule anywhere a reasonable judge would recognize. He shifted to negotiation. We can escalate, he said. We can try to get you on the schedule tomorrow. No, I said, today. Or I call the inspector and you explain why a red tag sat for 2 weeks while you argued about visible wood. He looked at the president's closed door like a kid looks at a parent in the bleachers. Give me an hour, he said. Give the kid in her living room less than that, I said. We waited on a bench in the lobby that had fake ficus on either side like neutrality. Elaine's hand sat in her lap, still. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. You didn't have to stand here and be loud for me. I wasn't loud, I was specific. She smiled, a small thing that made the room warmer. Specific is the nice word for loud. My mother used to say the world belongs to people who show up with paper. Your mother was a lawyer? I asked. A nurse, she said, but she understood triage. The hour took 30 minutes. Craig came back with the brutal cheerfulness of a man who'd pulled a favor and expects thanks to be interest. Technician will be there by 2. Part is in stock. Install should take 90 minutes. We'll comp the service call. And the firewood? I asked. He set a printed letter on the desk, already signed. Temporary emergency storage, screened, not visible from the street, 7 days, subject to extension pending install. It read legal enough to mean something, humane enough to matter. I nodded. Good, I said. Now email it to yourself, the president, and the board. CC the property manager, CC me, CC Elaine. He did, fingers moving faster than his eyes. Thank you, Elaine said, and in her thank you was a month of breath. We walked back to her place through a neighborhood that was suddenly paying attention. Tom was at his mailbox reading nothing. Miss Flores across the way was sweeping a leaf that didn't need sweeping. When we told them the heat was coming, the news rippled like a hand through tall grass. If they drag their feet, call me, she said, pointing to her phone. My nephew works for the city. I'll bring over another load of wood, Tom said. I got a stack nobody's using since I put in gas. We hadn't asked. That's the thing about people. Sometimes they're waiting for the problem to be named so they can do the part they already wanted to do. At 1:53 p.m., a van pulled up. The tech hopped out with a bit of metal and a smile that belonged to a man who enjoys fixing what's broken. He looked at the red tag, whistled softly, and got to work. Elaine stood in the doorway like a person afraid to hope. The husky paced, the kid watched like the Super Bowl. When the burner lit and the heat kicked, the house made a sound I will never be able to describe to someone who hasn't heard it. Relief, shaped like a furnace. The thermostat climbed past 60 like a tired runner seeing a finish line. The tech stuck a new sticker on the unit and wrote his name like an oath. You're safe, he said. It was the most beautiful sentence of the day. Then came the shock, the piece that would move the story from kindness to reckoning. While the tech packed up, I opened the HOA portal on my phone to download the emergency firewood letter for Elaine's records. In the resources section, a vendor list sat like a buffet. Landscaping, pool service, property management, heating and air. Next to HVAC was Harlow Home Services, an affiliate of Harlow Residential, both of which listed a mailing address that matched the HOA office. When I clicked more, a PDF popped up with preferred vendor agreement in the header and a signature block with the HOA president's name. In the margins, in smaller type, sat a referral fee schedule. I scrolled, throat tight. Referral fees for service calls, referral fees for installs, referral fees for God help me, emergency after hours calls. I took screenshots. I sent them to myself, my lawyer, and Tom. I sent them to the board alias. I sent them to the same journalist who had covered my deed story months earlier. Then I turned the screen and showed Elaine, who went very still. They were getting paid to be slow? She asked. They were getting paid to be needed, I said. And if being needed means saying yo to firewood until a vendor shows up, you make sure the vendor is yours. By 4 p.m., the neighborhood forum was a bonfire. People who'd waited weeks for pool repairs, people whose fences took months to approve unless they used a preferred contractor, people who'd wondered why one landscaping company cut our grass crooked for an entire summer. The word kickback appeared, followed by the word self-dealing, followed by the sentence, "This is a conflict of interest." Someone found the state HOA statute. Someone else found the section about fiduciary duty in good faith. Someone posted the screen recording of the vendor PDF and the fee schedule, and then the thread didn't need a moderator because it had a lawyer in every comment. At 6 p.m., the HOA sent a mass email framing it as efficiencies and partnerships that add value. At 6:03, half the block clicked reply all and wrote resign. At 6:15, the journalist called and asked whether the sentence, "Kid slept in a 57-degree house while a board blocked firewood and collected referral fees," was accurate. "Yes," I said, "and the kid is eating pancakes." I put the phone down and flipped a second batch, because outrage doesn't make you forget a promised breakfast for dinner. At 7, Tom knocked with 3 other neighbors and a petition template someone had used 10 years ago to recall a treasurer who forgot what numbers are for. "You said bravery is fear with homework," he said. We did both. We sat at Elaine's table with hot mugs and wrote clean sentences. Conflict of interest disclosure requirements, emergency policy for heat and water, prohibition on rulemaking that prioritizes appearance over safety, vendor selection transparency, and a board code of ethics with teeth. We wrote dates, we wrote process, we wrote where the meeting would be and where the signatures would go. The husky fell asleep with his head on my foot. By 9, the story had left our street and entered the bloodstream. A radio host said, "You can't make this up." A council member texted me to say, "Call me tomorrow." The tech, bless him, texted Elaine a thumbs up and "Call me if anything trips." The heat kept doing the boring heroic thing it does when no one gets in its way. I walked home under a sky that had decided to be clear. My own woodpile looked smaller and right. I pulled 3 logs and stocked them by my stove and thought about a week from now when she wouldn't need mine, and a month from now when the HOA would need to explain itself into a microphone. Sleep found me faster than it had in a while. In my dream, the woodpile was taller, and the fence was lower, and a line of neighbors carried logs one by one to a house with a brick hearth and plastic over the windows removed. In the dream, no one asked whose wood it had been at the start, because sharing had converted ownership into something else, into a story you tell at a block party about the winter the neighborhood learned its own name.